Good early morning to you. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We are following breaking news in China, where President Trump is about to wrap up day one of his official state visit. Soon, Mr. Trump is expected to address the U.S. and Chinese delegations at the state banquet in Beijing.
Earlier today, that two-day summit kicked off with the usual pomp and circumstance, a welcome ceremony at the Great Hall of the People. Then U.S. and Chinese officials went behind closed doors for their high-stakes meeting. They discussed a number of big topics, including a potential trade truce and the war with Iran. President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping met for just over 2 hours today. Xi said the two countries, quote, should be partners, not rivals.
The U.S. brought along more than a dozen CEOs of major tech and financial companies, some you can see in this room right now, signaling this two-day summit will focus on business. Taiwan and the war with Iran are also expected to be big topics of discussion. Well, President Trump is about to speak at the official state banquet. They've just arrived in the room there. Again, some of those executives are there in the room, and we're going to listen in just a moment. But we're going to now bring in NBC News international correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer from Beijing.
Janice, walk us through what we can expect to see here during what has been dubbed the welcoming banquet.
Well, this is the punctuation on the first day of this historic summit for these two leaders. Both sides saying that the talks went well, that they addressed a number of issues, including trade, but also touched on Taiwan. That seemed to be the one topic that was a bit touchy, according to both sides, with China issuing a veiled warning about the need to have stability around Taiwan, saying, quote, clashes and even conflicts could put the entire relationship in jeopardy. But beyond that, there has been a lot of friendship today, signs that the two men are furthering their personal relationship, and the expectation that there could be some agreements that come out of this visit, primarily in trying to boost what China buys from the United States. President Trump wants to sell more beef, more aircraft. There's China's President Xi Jinping stepping up to the lectern. He, in this, wants to prioritize stability in relations with the United States. For him, the one objective, the one goal is to try to manage tensions over the longer term with the United States so that China's economy can get some traction. The tariffs that the U.S. announced last year made China nervous. At one point, those tariffs up in the triple digits. So what we've seen is both sides try to step back from that edge to try to come to a more stable place. Let's listen in to what they're saying at the banquet.
I'd like to extend a warm welcome to President Trump and the U.S. delegation.
这是一次历史性访问。今年是中国15开局之年，14亿多中国人民立足于5000多年中华文明深厚基础，正在以高质量发展全面推进中国式现代化。今年也是美国独立250周年，3亿多美国人民正在重振爱国、创新、开拓精神，推动美国发展。
And out here, we are listening to President Xi give his remarks ahead of President Trump right now. We are hearing him speak in Chinese. He'll say several sentences, and then we will get the English translation of that. Let's listen in.
美国再伟大，完全可以并行不悖，相互成就，造福世界。
This is a historic visit. This year marks the start of China's 15th five-year plan for economic and social development. The over 1.4 billion people of China, drawing on the rich heritage of our over 5,000-year civilization, are advancing Chinese modernization on all fronts through high-quality development. This year is also the 250th anniversary of American independence. The over 300 million American people are reinvigorating the spirit of patriotism, innovation, and enterprise. and ushering in a new journey for the development of the United States. The people of China and the United States are both great peoples. Achieving the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and making America great again can go hand in hand. We can help each other succeed and advance the well-being of the whole world.
55年前，尼克松总统派基辛格博士访华，中美开展乒乓外交，双方官民并举，推开了中美冰封20多年的大门，成为当代国际关系史上重大事件。此后，中美之间以很多开放合作的故事，不断书写着友谊的佳话。新形势下，我同特朗普总统顺应两国人民和国际社会期待，通过多次会晤和通话，推动中美关系保持总体稳定。
55 years ago, President Richard Nixon sent Dr. Henry Kissinger to visit China, and ping-pong diplomacy was carried out between our two countries. Through efforts of the two governments and peoples, the door that had remained frozen for over 20 years was opened, marking a milestone in contemporary international relations. From then on, China and the United States have written many chapters of friendship through mutual openness and cooperation. Under the new situation, President Trump and I, fully aware of the expectations of our two nations and the international community, have had multiple meetings and phone calls and kept China-US relations generally stable.
今天，我同特朗普总统就中美关系和国际及地区形势深入交换意见。我们一致认为，中美关系是当今世界最重要的双边关系，只能搞好，不能搞坏。两国合则两利，斗则俱伤，应该成为伙伴而不是对手。我们同意构建中美建设性战略稳定关系，推动中美关系稳定、健康、可持续发展，为世界带来更多和平、繁荣、进步。
Today, President Trump and I had in-depth exchanges on China-US relations and international and regional dynamics. We both believe that the China-US relationship is the most important bilateral relationship in the world. We must make it work and never mess it up. Both China and the United States stand to gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation. Our two countries should be partners rather than rivals. President Trump and I also agreed to build a constructive China-US relationship of strategic stability to promote the steady, sound, and sustainable development of China-US relations and bring more peace, prosperity, and progress to the world.
尊敬的特朗普总统先生、女士们、先生们、朋友们，纵观中美关系发展历程，能不能做到相互尊重、和平共处、合作共赢，是中美关系能否稳定发展的关键所在。当今世界变乱交织，中美关系承载着两国17亿多人民的福祉，关乎世界80多亿人民的利益。我们应当共同扛起这个历史重任，推动中美关系这艘巨轮沿着正确的航道平稳前行。
Honorable President Donald J. Trump, ladies and gentlemen, friends, looking back at the course of China-US relations, whether or not we could have mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation is the key to whether the relationship can advance steadily. The world today is changing and turbulent. China-US relations concern the well-being of the over 1.7 billion people of both countries and affect the interests of the over 8 billion people of the world. Both sides should rise up to this historic responsibility and steer the giant ship of China-US relations forward, steadily and in the right direction.
最后，我提议为中美两国发展繁荣和人民幸福，为中美关系的美好未来和两国人民的友谊，为特朗普总统以及在座的各位朋友的健康干杯。
Now please join me in a toast to the development and prosperity of China and the United States and the well-being of our people, to the bright future of China-US relations and the friendship between the two peoples, and to the health of President Trump and all the friends present. Cheers.
干杯。
Cheers.
You've been listening to Chinese President Xi Jinping make remarks in front of this group of dignitaries and business leaders in Beijing following this bilateral meeting between the Chinese president and President Trump. We're now expecting to hear from President Trump any moment. The Chinese president, though, here saying that the two of them have kept U.S.-China relations generally stable and then continued to push for more stability going forward that he said would cause peace, prosperity, and progress and be the most important relationship in the world. Let's bring back Janice Mackey-Ferrer, who's been listening with us. Janice, what stuck out to you from those remarks quickly before we hear from President Trump in a moment?
What struck me about President Xi's speech is that a lot of the language that he uses to describe Chinese aspirations, he's now ascribing to American aspirations as well. This idea of Chinese rejuvenation and making America great again in order to appeal to his guest. Let's listen into President Trump.
I want to thank President Xi, my friend, for this magnificent welcome, and it really was a magnificent welcome like none other, and for so graciously hosting us on this very historic state visit. We had extremely positive and productive conversations and meetings today with the Chinese delegation earlier, and this evening is another cherished opportunity to discuss among friends some of the things that we discussed today, all good for the United States and for China, and it was a great honor to be with you. Please.
感谢习近平主席。今天我们度过了非常美好的一天。首先要感谢习近平主席这一盛大的欢迎，那么也非常感谢在这一次历史性的国事访问当中非常慷慨地接待了我的代表团。那么今天早些时候，我们跟中方进行了富有成效以及具有建设性的对话。那今天晚上将是我们另外的一次机会，能够共同再次讨论我们今天早些时候已经讨论到的一些问题，以及我们的共同利益，以及我们如何能够为全人类塑造更好、更安全的未来。
The relationship between the American and Chinese people goes all the way back to America's founding. The first American consul to China, Samuel Shaw, arrived on the first American trading ship to reach these shores in 1784. The Chinese merchants had a name for the Americans. They called their visions the New People. 2.5 centuries later, that first connection has grown into one of the most consequential relationships in world history.
美国人民和中国人民之间的友谊可以追溯到美国的建国之初。那么，美国的第一任驻华大使萨缪尔·肖先生在1784年乘坐第一艘美国的商船到达了中国的沿岸。当时中国的商人是这样称呼到来的美国访客，他们将当时到来的美国访客称为一个崭新的民族。 250年后的今天，这一个当初的友谊已经慢慢的演变成为当今世界当中最举足轻重的关系之一。
From the beginning, our citizens have shared a deep sense of mutual respect. Founding Father Benjamin Franklin published the sayings of Confucius in his colonial newspaper, and today's sculpture, recognizing that ancient Chinese sage, is carved into the face of the United States Supreme Court very proudly.
从一开始，我们两国之间的人民就已经有深厚的相互的尊重。美国的国父本杰明·富兰克林曾经在他的殖民报纸当中刊登了孔子的《论语》，而今天在美国最高法院建筑物的门前，可以说有一个雕刻，这个雕刻就是为了向中国的这一名古代的圣人进行致敬。
The appreciation ran in both directions. Chinese admirers of President George Washington gifted a stone tablet honoring his memory to adorn the Washington Monument. It bears the words of a Chinese official who called the great general and statesman a hero among men.
这一种欣赏是相互的。那么许多中国人非常崇敬乔治·华盛顿总统。那么这些人当时就向美国捐赠了一个石碑，就是为了纪念华盛顿总统。目前这个石碑已经镶嵌在华盛顿纪念碑里面，石碑上刻有当时的一名中国官员形容这一名伟大的将军和政治家，他们把他称为人中豪杰。
And across the centuries, this mutual esteem grew into a relationship that reflected the tremendous talent and potential of our two people. Chinese workers helped lay the railroad tracks that connected our Atlantic coast to the Pacific. American travelers to China helped spread literacy and modern medicine. And at the request of China's ambassador, it was President Theodore Roosevelt who provided the funds to establish President Xi's alma mater, Tsinghua University.
在过去几百年当中，这种相互的尊敬已经成为了一段全新的关系。这段关系可以说反映出我们两国人民之间巨大的潜力以及我们的努力和智慧。中国工人当初帮助美国建设了我们的铁路路轨，连通了美国的大西岸和太平洋沿海地区。美国当时早期出访中国的美国人也帮助中国提升了识字率，并且引入了现代医学，并且应时任中国驻华大使的请求，罗斯福总统也专门提供了资金，成立了习主席的母校清华大学。
As allies in World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt's mentions of the brave people of China, that's what they were, drew loud cheers in his speeches in the United States, and everybody loved what he had to say, just as many Chinese now love basketball and blue jeans. Chinese restaurants in America today outnumber the 5 largest fast food chains in the United States, all combined. That's a pretty big statement.
那么，作为二战期间的盟国，罗斯福总统在美国的多次演讲当中提到了勇敢的中国人民。正如当前许多中国人非常喜欢篮球和穿蓝色的牛仔裤，在美国目前的中餐厅的数量要比美国前5大快餐连锁店的总的店面还要多。
This bond of commerce and respect that stretches back 250 years is the foundation for a future that benefits both of our nations. The American and Chinese people share much in common. We value hard work, we value courage and achievement, we love our families, and we love our countries. Together we have the chance to draw on these values to create a future of greater prosperity, cooperation, and happiness, and peace for our children. We love our children, this region and the world. It's a special world with the two of us united and together.
那么至于商业当中的纽带以及我们的相互尊重，可以说追溯到250年前，是我们将要构建的未来的基础。至于未来将会惠及我们两国的人民，美国人民和中国人民有许多的共同点，我们都崇尚劳动，我们都崇尚勇气和成就，我们都非常爱我们的家庭，我们也爱我们的国家。我们两国一道，我们将有机会基于我们共同的价值观，创造出一个更加繁荣、基于合作、幸福、和平的未来，为我们的子孙、为本地区以及全世界造福。
Thank you again, President Xi, for this beautiful welcome. And tonight it is my honor to extend an invitation to you and Madam Peng to visit us at the White House this September 24th, and we look forward to it. And I'd now like to raise a glass and propose a toast to the rich and enduring ties between the American and Chinese people. It's a very special relationship, and I want to thank you again. This has been an amazing period of time. Thank you, President Xi.
那么再一次感谢习主席。
Right, as America prepares to celebrate its 250th birthday, President Trump referencing the past in America's history, talking about U.S.-China relations over the years, also talking about the present, saying that today's talks between the two countries extremely positive and productive, and referencing the future with an invitation to China's president to visit the White House in September. Let's bring in NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer to talk more about these comments we heard during the welcoming banquet. The president speaking for just under 10 minutes here, including the translation, largely staying on script. We don't expect controversial comments at a banquet like this. Janice, walk us through what we've heard over the last several minutes. Anything stand out?
What seems to stand out is that both men are being very gracious to each other. President Trump has talked often about his friendship with Xi Jinping. He considers him a gentleman and a good host and a great leader, as he said today. And there is the sense that the feeling is mutual, that there is something in the way that Xi Jinping conducts himself with Donald Trump that seems different from other leaders. But he's not looking primarily for friendship out of this summit and out of this visit. China is seeing this as an opportunity to try to manage this important relationship for the longer term, to try to shore up the economy here, to dial down the temperature, especially when it comes to U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods. So it's not that we're going to see any grand bargain or reset come out of this, but what this does signal is that on this first day of the summit, they have been able to start conversations, and these are conversations that are going to continue. President Trump saying that September 24th is the date that he would like to host President Xi at the White House. So there is the sense that these two men are taking a breath together, if we can say that, and really wanting to move the relationship forward because they see the benefit on both sides.
Notable to me, Janice, that we had President Xi calling this the most important bilateral relationship in the world and President Trump calling it one of the most consequential relationships in world history. To your point, really sort of just in agreement and both showing this graciousness to each other. Janice, walk us through, though, what came out of these readouts, because there was a little bit of disparity between the focus that China put on their readout from this meeting on Taiwan. It was entirely missing from the U.S.'s readout of that meeting between the two. And then what we did here on the war with Iran and trade, sort of the three big topics heading into this.
Well, the U.S. side felt that the talks went well today. They described them as good. They touched on trade issues, fentanyl and technology, some of the other issues that they've been wanting to address. There are still some very big elephants in the room, so to speak, with critical minerals and rare earths. China has slapped export controls on certain things that America needs for its supply chains. And there is also this issue of Taiwan. There was the expectation that Taiwan was going to factor into the discussion in ways that it hasn't before. The Chinese side has certainly been telegraphing it over the past few weeks. China was wanting to urge or discuss U.S. arms deals with Taiwan with President Trump. They want to perhaps pressure him, urge him to delay these arms sales or even scale them back. We have to understand, though, that to even have this discussion between a U.S. president and a Chinese leader is unprecedented. And that's what was making some people nervous going into this meeting, that perhaps President Trump, when he was face-to-face with Xi Jinping, was maybe going to agree to things that he necessarily should not. That could change policy, long-standing U.S. policy. There's been no indication that it went that far today, but there is the sense that Xi Jinping wanted to have his say on Taiwan. And he issued what many consider to be a warning, the sense that, I want to get the language correct here, the sense that he was saying that clashes and even conflicts could put the entire relationship in great jeopardy. And as you mentioned, Savannah, that was something that was missing from the American readout. The Iran war also was expected to be discussed today, with China seen as having leverage with Iran as an oil client, and of course with vast economic interests in the Middle East. There was the sense, though, that President Xi didn't want Iran to dominate the agenda. He wanted this to be an opportunity to talk to the U.S. president about China, not Iran. And as well, that there might be some hesitation on President Trump's part to appear as though he was coming to his chief competitor and asking for help to end a conflict. As well, Xi Jinping wouldn't want to be seen as aligning himself too much with Washington when it comes to Iran. So it seems these talks did get off to a good start today. They do continue into tomorrow. And there are also the CEOs who are here who are having their own meetings, trying to not only drum up some deals, but importantly to get access and influence here in the Chinese market.
Right. NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer. For now, they will eat. Day 2 kicks off tomorrow. Thanks for joining us in our breaking news coverage of day one of President Trump's state visit to China.
Stay with us. We will have more coverage on Trump and Xi's high-stakes meeting in our next hour. Now we will rejoin early today. See you shortly.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.